It was one of those nights when the rain doesn't just fall, it presses down, relentless and suffocating, drowning every sound except for the hammering on the roof and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. I had been staying alone in my uncle's old cabin deep in the woods for a weekend retreat, hoping to escape the chaos of the city. By late evening, the storm had intensified, and the only light inside the cabin came from a flickering lamp and the intermittent lightning outside. I was curled up on the couch with a thick blanket, watching shadows stretch across the walls as the wind howled. Then I saw her, a silhouette standing outside the window, barely visible through the sheets of rain. Her head tilted unnaturally, her long hair plastered to her face. I froze, certain it was a trick of the light, until she raised her hand slowly and pressed it against the glass. The rain seemed to drip from her fingers, as if she were soaked in the storm itself. My pulse raced. I told myself it was a neighbor or a passerby seeking shelter, but there was no road within miles. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, and tried to focus on the lamp, on the mundane things that could anchor me in reality. But then, the sound came, faint, scratching, soft but deliberate, moving along the siding of the cabin, circling, like someone tracing the walls with their fingernails. The silhouette didn't move, yet the scratching moved, following my steps as I nervously walked from the living room toward the bedroom. Every reflective surface, every puddle on the wooden floor reflected her image back at me, though when I turned, the outside was empty. I tried calling out, "Hello? Who's there?" My voice barely carried over the storm. No reply, just the relentless scratching and the occasional tap against the window frame, sharp and sudden. By midnight, the storm had reached its peak. The wind rattled the cabin like it might lift the roof entirely, and the rain hammered the windows so hard I could see the droplets bouncing back off the glass. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't look away. The silhouette remained outside, watching. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Time distorted by fear and the rhythm of the rain. Then, when lightning struck close by, illuminating the trees in jagged bursts, I saw her face clearly. Pale, featureless in the dark, except for two black pits where her eyes should have been. Her mouth opened wide, unnaturally wide, and I could hear a faint, wet whisper carried on the wind. "I see you." Terrified, I grabbed my coat and keys, planning to flee into the storm. But as I opened the door, the rain poured in with a force I couldn't fight. The ground outside was not solid. It rippled like water, yet supported nothing. And the moment I stepped off the porch, the world seemed to bend. I stumbled back inside, the door slamming shut on its own, locking as if it had never been meant to open. The silhouette vanished from the window, but its presence remained, a lingering weight, A cold pressure in the air, the storm outside, started to subside, leaving only silence and dripping water. But inside the cabin, I could hear soft footsteps moving around, circling, following me, reflecting in every window. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, flashlight in hand, listening to the scratches and whispers, until morning light finally penetrated the rain clouds. When I finally looked outside, the world appeared normal. No trees bent unnaturally, no distorted porch, no silhouette. But on the inside of the glass, faint streaks of water remained, shaped almost like a human hand, pointing toward the cabin, as if reminding me that she had been there, and she would return. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, and the old Victorian house I had inherited from my great-aunt groaned under the weight of the storm. Each beam, each creaking floorboard seemed to sigh as the wind pressed against the windows, rattling them in their frames. I had moved in only a week ago, planning to sort through the cluttered rooms and finally claim the house as my own. The first few nights had been uneasy. Shadows stretching too far, the occasional whisper I could not identify. But on the third night, as lightning flashed across the sky, I heard it clearly, for the first time, soft, almost pleading, coming from above, the attic. I hadn't planned to go up there. The old wooden ladder groaned under even my weight, and cobwebs brushed my face as I climbed. The rain pattered heavily against the roof, and each step seemed louder than the last, echoing through the house. When I reached the attic door, I hesitated. The whispers were clearer now, multiple voices, overlapping, almost in a language I didn't understand. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. The door swung open with a long creak, revealing darkness so complete that my flashlight barely penetrated it. Inside, the air was thick with dust and a damp, moldy scent. Boxes of forgotten belongings were stacked haphazardly, and old portraits leaned against the walls, their faces distorted in the dim light. I froze when I saw movement, shadows flickering across the boxes, though there was no wind to create it. And then I heard the whispers again, closer now, circling me, following me as I moved forward. One voice, softer, clearer, whispered my name. I spun around. Nothing. Only the rain pounding on the roof. I stepped forward, heart racing, and my flashlight caught something. A small, ornate mirror propped against a box. And in it, I saw them. Figures. Children. Pale. Soaked as if drenched in rain, despite the attic being dry. They stared, expressionless, mouths opening and closing, like they were mouthing words I could not hear. Their eyes followed me wherever I moved. I tried to retreat, but the ladder I had climbed vanished. The attic had grown, stretched impossibly, walls now leaning outward, ceiling rising high above me. The whispers turned into murmurs, then low chants, a language older than anything I knew. The air grew cold, so cold that my breath formed misty clouds in front of me. A shadow detached itself from the corner of the attic, humanoid, but its limbs bent wrong, moving in jerky, unnatural angles. It pointed at me, with a hand too long, too thin, and the whispers grew louder, louder, until I could barely think. I bolted toward the stairs that suddenly appeared, diving down as the attic seemed to pulse, walls flexing like a living thing. I slammed the door behind me and ran to the living room, the house shaking with the storm and the sound of whispers still echoing from above. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the phone line was dead. The rain outside seemed heavier now, pounding against the windows like fists, drowning out all sound except for the faint, unmistakable whispers that had followed me down. When morning finally arrived, the storm ceased and the house was silent. I dared to glance at the attic. The door was just a door again, the ladder ordinary, boxes dust-covered. Nothing seemed out of place. I thought I had imagined it all, until I found the first box, slightly moved, dust scattered, as if something had brushed against it. And when I turned, I saw in the mirror I had placed in the hallway faint reflections of children's faces staring at me, their eyes hollow, wet streaks running down their cheeks as if rain had fallen inside the house. I left that day, vowing never to return. But even now, during storms, I swear I can hear them, faint whispers coming from the attic, calling my name, inviting me back, promising I could stay if I only answered them again. The storm had been raging for hours, a relentless downpour that turned the streets into rivers of water, reflecting the orange glow of streetlights. I had been driving through the countryside, trying to reach a friend's house, before the road became completely impassable. The rain was so heavy that it obscured everything beyond a few feet, and the wind rattled the car like it might lift it off the road. That's when I saw it, a small, weathered inn tucked between two large oaks, its sign swinging violently with the storm. A faint light glimmered from a window on the second floor, offering a promise of shelter. Desperate, I turned into the driveway. The inn looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, windows cracked, and the steps to the entrance were slick with rain. Yet the door opened with a soft creak the moment I touched it. Inside, the air was thick and damp, smelling of mildew and old wood. A single hallway stretched before me, lined with doors, each labeled with a small brass number. I found the innkeeper nowhere in sight. On instinct, I picked room 6, a key dangling from the doorframe. The room was small, sparsely furnished, but dry. I shook off my wet coat and collapsed onto the bed, listening to the rain hammering the roof. Minutes later, I noticed something odd. The door, which I had locked, now had a small chain lock that I was certain had not been there before. I brushed it off as imagination and tried to sleep. Hours later, the rain had intensified and a sound woke me. Scraping, slow, deliberate, coming from the door. I sat up, heart hammering, flashlight in hand. The handle rattled. Then, a faint whisper, like someone trying to speak through a wall. Let me in. I backed away, shaking, certain I was alone. But then, the whispers grew louder, coming from the other side of the door. You can't leave. Not tonight. The door handle twisted. I slammed the chain lock into place, but the door rattled violently as if something strong was trying to push through. My eyes darted around the room. The window was locked tight, and the room smelled suddenly of wet soil and iron. Something was here, inside the room, yet unseen. I spent the rest of the night pressed against the far wall, listening. The scratching and whispering never ceased. Occasionally, I glimpsed shadows moving across the floor. Too fast, too fluid to be my imagination. At one point, my flashlight flickered, and in the brief flash, I saw it. A figure crouched in the corner, wet and pale, head tilted at an impossible angle, staring with hollow eyes. When the light steadied, the corner was empty. By dawn, the storm had eased slightly, and the room appeared ordinary again. I bolted from the inn, rain soaking me instantly, and never looked back. Days later, I returned to the address in daylight. The inn was gone. In its place was an empty field, the ground muddy. Nothing but footprints leading away into the trees. Mine. No one could explain the inn. No record of its existence. But I can still hear it sometimes. Faint tapping on a locked door, whispers through the walls when it rains, shadows lurking just beyond my sight. And I know, if I ever hear that sound again, the room will find me, because it always waits for those who seek shelter during the storm. It was supposed to be a quick stop, just one night to get out of the rain. But when I checked into that old countryside inn, I didn't realize the room was never meant to be opened again. They say some doors keep themselves locked for a reason. And that night, I learned why. It started on a night that felt endless. Sheets of rain hammered my windshield, blurring the road into nothing but streaks of light and darkness. I'd been driving for hours through winding rural highways, trying to find a shortcut to the next town. The radio had long gone static, and my GPS flickered in and out. When the road finally disappeared into fog, I caught a glimpse of a sign through the downpour. Hillcrest Inn, vacancy. The letters glowed faintly beneath a layer of grime. I pulled in, desperate for shelter. The inn stood crooked against the storm, its porch sagging, wooden signs swinging wildly in the wind. No cars outside, No lights in the lobby. Just one lamp burning dimly in the upstairs hallway. The rain soaked through my jacket as I pushed open the door. It creaked loudly, the smell of damp wood and mold hitting me instantly. Inside was a single corridor, lined with old wallpaper, peeling in strips. The counter at the front was empty, but a small brass bell sat there with a note beside it. Rooms are ready. Take the key that calls to you. The sentence didn't make sense, but there were keys hanging on the wall, each tagged with a room number. I didn't think much of it, not until my eyes settled on one key swinging slowly on its hook, as though stirred by an invisible breeze. The tag read Room 6. I took it. The hallway was silent, except for the rain's muffled rhythm outside. When I reached Room 6, the key fit perfectly, almost too perfectly, and the door opened without resistance. The room smelled like dust and rainwater, faded curtains, an old brass bed frame, and a cracked mirror above a dresser. Nothing unusual. At first, I locked the door, tossed my wet coat over a chair, and collapsed onto the bed. The storm's roar became almost soothing, like white noise, until the scratching started. It was faint, coming from the hallway, slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging along the wood. Then a knock, soft but steady, directly at my door. "Hello?" I called out, voice shaking slightly. No answer. Only silence and the sound of rain dripping through the gutter. I approached the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I exhaled, uneasy, but tired enough to ignore it. But when I turned around, the mirror caught my attention. The reflection didn't match the room. In the mirror, the bed was unmade, sheets torn and crumpled, wet footprints leading from the door to where I stood. I blinked, turned around. The real bed was perfectly fine. When I looked back, the footprints were closer in the reflection. A loud bang echoed from somewhere down the hall. I froze. The lights flickered. When I turned the door handle to check, it refused to move. I tried again, harder, locked from the outside. My pulse raced. I hadn't locked it that way. I could feel cold air leaking through the keyhole, as though someone were breathing on the other side. "Is anyone out there?" I shouted. A pause. Then, soft and wet, a whisper. "Don't open the door." My chest tightened. "Who's there?" Silence. I stumbled back from the door, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The mirror caught my reflection again, only this time, I wasn't alone. A figure stood behind me in the glass. Tall, thin, dripping wet, head tilted as though it had broken its neck. I spun around. Nothing. Just the smell of rain and old wood. But droplets were forming on the carpet now. Small puddles where no water should have reached. The scratching resumed, Only now, it was coming from inside the walls. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning anymore. I sat on the bed, clutching the flashlight, staring at the mirror. Occasionally, I saw movement inside it, like something pacing. Every so often, the figure leaned closer, its soaked hair dripping down the glass. The rain outside intensified, pounding in sync with my heartbeat. Then the whisper came again, but this time, from inside the room. "You chose the key." I turned toward the corner, and the air shifted. The temperature dropped sharply. My breath misted in front of me. The reflection showed the figure kneeling in the same corner, its hands pressed flat against the wall, whispering words that sounded like prayers in reverse. When I turned back, the corner was empty, but a wet handprint glistened on the wallpaper. The door suddenly rattled violently, as if something was trying to get in or out. The chain lock snapped on its own. I screamed and grabbed the key from the nightstand, jamming it into the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices now. Hundreds, maybe thousands, murmuring beneath the storm. Then, without warning, silence. Everything stopped. The rain, the wind, even the sound of my heartbeat. The stillness was suffocating. I stepped back, trembling. The mirror began to fog from the inside, letters forming on the glass. Room 6 never checks out. The fog thickened, and through it, I saw movement. Dozens of pale faces pressing against the mirror from within, mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. When the light flickered back, the door stood wide open. The hallway was empty. The air smelled of mud and decay. I bolted out, sprinting down the stairs, and ran into the rain, not stopping until I reached the main road. The next morning, I went back with local police. The field was empty. No inn, no building, not even tire tracks. Just wet earth and broken wood, as if something old had once stood there and sunk beneath the soil. I tried to forget it, but sometimes, when it rains at night, my phone rings. An unknown number, static on the other end, and faintly, the sound of dripping water. And I swear, if I look too long into a mirror after answering, I still see the outline of room 6 behind me, and a figure standing very still, waiting for me to check back in. It was supposed to be a simple ride home, just the last bus out of town on a stormy Tuesday night. I remember thinking that, just one last ride. But when you see a shadow move in a reflection that isn't yours, you realize some rides are never meant to end. The rain had been falling all evening, heavy and unrelenting. The streets were slick, shining like black glass under the weak glow of streetlights. I'd stayed late at the library, finishing a project, and by the time I left, the world felt deserted. The only sounds were the rain tapping against my umbrella and the low buzz of the neon sign above the bus stop, flickering with tired electricity. When the last bus pulled up, its headlights sliced through the rain like knives. I stepped inside, shaking off the cold. The air was thick with the scent of wet leather, engine oil, and the faint must of old upholstery. The driver barely glanced at me, just a nod, and I moved down the aisle. There was only one other passenger, an elderly woman sitting near the back, knitting something small and gray. Her hands moved methodically, like she'd done it for years, eyes never leaving her work. I chose a window seat halfway down the aisle. The rain beat against the glass in a rhythmic patter. My reflection stared back, tired, ghost-like, surrounded by the shifting blur of lights outside. The bus hummed softly as it rolled through the empty streets. For a while, it was peaceful, almost hypnotic. But then, as we rounded a bend, something in my reflection changed. A shadow appeared, faint, behind my shoulder in the glass. Human-shaped, but not quite right. Its head tilted too far to the side, the limbs stretched longer than they should have. My stomach tightened. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was nothing. The rain, the motion. Maybe I was exhausted. I turned my head to check behind me. Nothing but empty seats and flickering aisle lights. I tried to laugh it off. Minutes passed. The sound of rain on the windows was almost soothing again. But when I glanced toward the back of the bus, the old woman was gone. I frowned. I'd seen her just moments ago, knitting, quietly humming. Now the seat was empty. I stood and made my way to the back, phone in hand, the flashlight app cutting through the dim light. The seat where she'd been was soaked. Water pooled in the cushion, dripping onto the floor. But there was no cup, no umbrella, no bag, nothing that suggested she'd ever been there at all. Then I heard it, a whisper, barely audible over the rain. "Why are you here?" I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned, scanning the aisle, but there was no one. The driver was still at the wheel, his silhouette motionless. I told myself again that it was just the wind, the storm, my mind playing tricks. I hurried back to my seat and sat down, forcing my eyes to stay forward. That's when I saw it again, the reflection, the shadow. It was closer this time, its shape clearer in the window. Its face, if you could call it that, was pure darkness, like wet charcoal smeared across glass. It didn't move like a person. It pulsed like smoke trapped under the surface of the mirror. And then it raised an arm, slowly, deliberately. Its hand pressed against the inside of the glass. From the other side, the bus lights flickered. Once, twice, then everything went black. The windows became pitch. The only thing I could see was the shadow, still there, still staring. I shut my eyes tight and counted to 10. When I opened them, the lights had returned. The reflection was normal again. The rain outside, my own face, nothing else. The bus continued through the storm. It made stops along the route. The doors opened. The cold night air swept in. But no one got on. No one got off. And every time the door closed, I felt the bus grow quieter, heavier, like the night itself was pressing against it. At one stop, I heard breathing, not from the driver, not from behind, from beside me. Slow, shallow breaths, like someone sitting inches away. I turned my head, and the seat was empty, but the air was colder there, damp, and the smell wrong, metallic, like soil after rain, mixed with something decaying beneath it. Then I looked back at the window, and I saw them. Not one, not two. A crowd of figures, their shadows filling the seats behind me, pressed against the glass from inside the reflection. Their faces were featureless, mouths open in silent, agonized screams. My pulse went cold. I shot to my feet, heart hammering. I looked toward the front, desperate for the driver. But when my eyes met his reflection in the rearview mirror, I froze. His head was gone, just blackness where his face should have been. The bus took a sharp turn, the engine groaning. I gripped the seat to steady myself. Rain streaked across the windows like claws. I pulled the stop cord. The bell rang, but the bus didn't slow. "Hey!" I shouted. No response. I pressed the emergency brake button. Nothing happened. The reflections started moving again. The shadows multiplied, shifting, writhing, pressing their hands against the glass. Faces formed and dissolved. Their mouths moved without sound. But I could feel their whispers echoing inside my skull. My name. Over and over. The reflection in my window changed again. The bus interior I saw there wasn't real anymore. It was full. Every seat taken by shadows. Dozens of them. All turned toward me, all whispering my name. My body went numb. My skin prickled with cold. I stumbled down the aisle, toward the front. The driver wasn't there anymore. Just the wheel, turning itself, the bus driving on. I don't remember what happened next. The last thing I recall is the bus swerving, the tires screeching against wet asphalt. Then, nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the side of the road, rain pouring down, my clothes soaked through. The road was empty. The bus was gone. Not crashed, not stopped. Gone, like it had never existed. Later, when I tried to report it, the transit company said no bus had run that night. No driver had been scheduled. That route, they told me, hadn't operated in over 20 years. And the elderly woman, I described her. They said she matched someone who used to take that bus home before it crashed in 1989. she'd never made it to her stop. Now, on nights when it rains hard, I still catch glimpses of movement in windows, in mirrors, in my phone screen. Shadows that linger a second too long. Sometimes, I think the bus is still out there, rolling through the storm, picking up passengers who don't realize it's not supposed to exist. So if you ever find yourself on a quiet, rainy night, staring into a window, and you see something move that isn't you, don't look away, because it's already looking back. You ever get a phone call from somewhere that shouldn't even exist? I did. And it came from the last place I ever wanted to go. An abandoned motel, hidden in the fog, where no one had stayed in decades. Or so I thought. It all started on a road trip I'd been planning for months. My friends and I wanted to get away from the city. No plans, no rules, just miles of open road. They'd convinced me to take the scenic route through rural Oregon, saying it'd be peaceful, quiet highways, empty diners, the kind of calm that helps you forget the noise of normal life. And for a while, it was, until the fog rolled in. It started as a faint haze at the edge of the tree line, then thickened until it swallowed the headlights whole. The road blurred. The world beyond the windshield vanished. The GPS froze, its robotic voice repeating, recalculating, until it fell silent altogether. When I glanced at my phone, there was no signal, no bars, no service, just a faint flicker on the battery icon. We drove for another 15 minutes, maybe 20. No houses, no other cars, just the hum of the tires and the rain beginning to fall in cold, heavy sheets. Then, through the fog, a faint orange glow appeared, flickering, weak, but unmistakably artificial. A neon sign. It read, Red Pine Motel, vacancy. The N in vacancy buzzed and sputtered, half dead. The sign swayed slightly in the wind. The building behind it loomed out of a fog like something forgotten. 2 stories, maybe 12 rooms total. Paint peeled from the walls. Windows were cracked and filmed with grime. One door hung from a single hinge, swinging with each gust of wind. The roof sagged inward like a tired sigh. We should have kept driving. Every instinct told me to. But the rain had become a downpour, and my friend Matt insisted we stop. Just one night, he said. We'll head out in the morning. The gravel crunched under our tires as we pulled in. The lobby light flickered on, faint but steady, as if the place had been waiting. Inside, it smelled of damp carpet and old dust. The fluorescent light above the counter buzzed unevenly. A tarnished brass bell sat on the desk. I hesitated, then pressed it. Ding. No answer. Only the sound of the rain against the windows. Then, from the back room, a soft click. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Tall, thin, wearing a dark, rain-soaked jacket that seemed decades out of style. His skin was grayish, his hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes didn't quite look at me, more like through me, Rooms? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He tilted his head, just slightly. Then he whispered, 1. Matt tried to hand him cash, but the man didn't take it. He just pointed, a long, thin finger, toward the staircase. We didn't argue. Room 7 was small and smelled of mold. The wallpaper peeled in long curls, revealing cracked plaster underneath. The bed sagged deeply in the middle, the blanket threadbare and cold. When I touched the nightstand, dust clung to my fingers like ash. The bathroom light flickered when I tried the switch, and when I turned on the faucet, only a faint trickle of rusty water sputtered out. I sat on the bed and tried to get a signal on my phone. Nothing. No service. No Wi-Fi. Not even a faint connection. That's when it rang. Not a ringtone from my phone, an old one. That shrill, metallic tone from the early 2000s. My screen flashed with an unknown number. I frowned. No one could call me here. I answered. Hello? At first, silence. Then, faintly, like a whisper carried through static, a voice said, "Check the phone in the lobby." My chest tightened. Who is this? The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my ears. Matt thought it was a prank. Someone probably hooked it up for kicks, he said, laughing nervously. But the way the fog pressed against the window, thick and white, made me feel like the world outside didn't exist anymore. Still, I went. The hallway felt longer than before. The carpet squelched under my shoes. Wet, though we hadn't tracked in that much water. The walls seemed to breathe with the sound of the rain outside. When I reached the lobby, the desk phone was already ringing. I hesitated, then picked it up. "Help me." A girl's voice whispered. It was faint, trembling, young. "Who is this?" I asked. Silence. Then the faint sound of rain, and slowly, laughter. Wet, gurgling laughter that seemed to echo from inside the walls. I slammed the receiver down. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the lobby. I could hear the rain hammering the roof, louder than before, almost deafening. Then, faintly, a sound from upstairs. Footsteps, small ones, pattering. I turned my phone flashlight on and ran back toward the stairs. Matt was at the top, shouting my name. When I joined him, I saw them. Footprints, tiny, wet, leading down the hallway. We followed. The prince stopped in front of room 12. The door creaked open as we approached. Inside, everything was different. The room was spotless. Bed made perfectly, curtains drawn. The air was cold, too cold. And then I saw it. On the pillow, a single handprint. Small, wet, and red. The smell hit me next. Iron, copper, blood. Then, footsteps, slow, dragging, coming from behind us. I spun around. The hallway was empty. But the mirror above the dresser caught my eye. In its reflection, she stood there, a little girl, hair soaked, face pale, eyes black and empty. Her mouth opened slowly, wider than it should have, and she screamed, though no sound came out. I turned, but she was gone. My phone vibrated again. The same number. My hands shook as I answered. "Why are you here?" a voice whispered. I don't know," I stammered. Then another voice joined in. Older, raspier, closer. "You shouldn't have answered." The call dropped. The lights flickered on again, humming weakly. The room was empty, but when I looked out the window, figures stood in the fog. Still silhouettes, watching us. There were more of them now. We ran. Down the stairs, through the lobby. The bell on the counter rang by itself. A sharp ding that echoed through the motel. The front door was open, swaying in the wind. We didn't stop. We sprinted into the storm, shoes splashing through puddles. When I looked back, the motel looked new, perfect. Every window clean, every light glowing. The neon sign above the entrance burned bright. Red Pine Motel. And in the lobby, behind the desk, the man stood there again. Only this time, his face was wrong. Hollow, a pit of black, dripping shadow. His hand raised slowly, pointing at us. We didn't look back again. It was almost dawn when we reached the main highway. By then, the fog had lifted. When I turned around, there was nothing behind us. Just trees. No motel. No sign. Weeks later, I tried to find it again. I searched maps, records, old directories. There was no Red Pine Motel in the county. Locals said no such place ever existed. The road I remembered led straight into the forest, ending at a dead stop. But sometimes, late at night, when it rains hard enough that the world goes quiet, my phone rings again. Unknown number. When I answer, I hear it. The faint hiss of rain. A distant echo of a child's voice, whispering, "Why are you here?" And then, just before the line cuts, I hear something else. Faint, wet, deliberate. A bell, ringing. They say the weather can hold memories. That places where something terrible happened can trap the storm that witnessed it. I used to think that was poetic nonsense, until I spent a single night in the house where the rain never stopped. When I was 23, I worked as a part-time home appraiser for a small real estate company outside Portland. Most of my days were spent in quiet, empty spaces. Houses half-finished. Foreclosure properties filled with dust and old furniture. But in late March, I got an assignment that felt strange from the very beginning. The address wasn't in our usual district, and the file had no listed owner. Just a faded black and white photograph of a 2-story farmhouse surrounded by black pines. Someone had scribbled across the corner of the file in red ink, "Don't stay after dark." I thought it was a joke. Some coworker's idea of dark humor. But that feeling, that weight behind the note, stuck with me during the entire drive. It took nearly an hour to reach the place, down a twisting gravel road that wound through endless forest. The sky grew darker with every mile, the air thick with the smell of wet pine and distant rain. By the time I reached the clearing, a light drizzle had started. The house stood at the center of the property, like a skeleton, its paint gray and peeling, its roof sagging in the middle. The windows were fogged from the inside, obscuring the view, yet the front door looked freshly cleaned, almost polished. That detail made me hesitate. Everything around it screamed decay, but that one piece, the clean, perfect door, felt wrong. When I stepped inside, the first thing that hit me was the smell. Damp wood and rust, like old water sitting too long in pipes. The air was heavy, cool, almost humid. Every surface glistened faintly under my flashlight beam. The floorboards, the wallpaper, even the curtains, everything was wet, as though the house had been caught in a storm for decades. I muttered to myself, "Roof leak, maybe," and tilted my light upward. But the ceiling was bone dry, not a single drip. Then I noticed it. Small beads of water forming on the walls themselves, rolling downward in perfect little streams, before vanishing into the cracks of the floorboards. The sound, faint, steady, like rain tapping inside the walls. I walked through the hall, careful not to slip, and entered what must have been the living room. Dozens of framed photographs lined the walls, each one covered in a thin layer of condensation. Families from another time, a man, a woman, 2 children, all standing in front of this very house. At first, it was hard to tell what was wrong. But as I examined the photos more closely, I saw the difference from one to the next. In the first, they were smiling, dry, normal. In the second, their clothes looked damp. In the third, droplets clung to their hair. By the 5th photo, their eyes seemed swollen, their expressions warped. Their skin shined slick like something freshly pulled from a river. And by the last one, their mouths were open as if mid-scream, and the rain in the picture wasn't falling behind them anymore. It was falling inside the image. I took a shaky breath and reached for my phone. I needed photos, proof of the inspection. I snapped a few shots of the room, the frames, the water damage. Then I noticed something that made my heart seize. In the reflection of one of the glass frames, I saw my own face. But the me in the reflection wasn't holding my phone. It was smiling. A sound echoed through the house. Drip, drip, drip. Only this time, it came from below. The basement door was half open at the end of the hallway, and from the darkness below, I felt a faint, cold draft, like something breathing out. My gut twisted. Every instinct screamed to leave, but curiosity, or something else, drew me closer. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned wetly. The stairs were slick under my boots. The smell of damp earth growing stronger the deeper I went. At the bottom, my flashlight beam caught something shimmering. Water. A pool of it, maybe 10 feet wide, filling the center of the basement. The surface was unnaturally still, glass-like, reflecting the ceiling above. But the reflection didn't match. Instead of cracked concrete and rotting beams, the reflection showed an open sky. Clouds rolling. Rain falling. A storm raging inside the image of that water. And below the surface, just barely visible through the rippling shimmer, were 4 shapes. Human shapes. Floating. I crouched, holding my breath, and aimed my light closer. That's when I saw their faces. Pale, bloated, eyes open, mouths wide, as if still gasping for air. The family. The same faces from the photographs. Their skin seemed to move. Their lips trembling like they were still trying to speak. Water bubbled from their mouths, forming distorted shapes, words I couldn't understand. Something cold touched my hand. I jerked back, but the water followed. Droplets rolled up my wrist, spreading across my sleeve, my chest, my face, and then the basement walls began to weep. Streams of water gushed upward from the cracks, not downward. It was raining up. The sound hid next. A deafening rush, like being caught inside a thunderstorm. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging everything into pitch darkness. I staggered toward the stairs, slipping, choking as the water climbed past my knees. When I reached the steps, the door above slammed shut, with a force that shook the walls. I screamed, pounding on it until my knuckles split. "Help, please!" Then came the sound, slow, wet breathing. Not mine. From the other side of the door, a voice, soft and almost kind, whispered through the wood. "You shouldn't have come here at night." I turned. The basement was glowing faintly now, lit by some cold blue light reflecting off the rising water. And there they were, the family, standing in the pool, water dripping from their faces, eyes glassy and unblinking. The mother stepped forward first, her soaked dress clinging to her thin frame. She raised a trembling hand and pointed at me. "You let the rain in." I screamed. The water surged upward, filling my mouth, my nose, my lungs. I don't remember how I escaped. I only remember running, bursting through the front door and into the night. Rain pouring from nowhere, pounding the ground like fists. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. My car sat where I left it, engine cold. I climbed inside, soaked to the bone, trembling. When I looked back, the house was glowing faintly. Water poured from every window, every crack, like a drowning thing exhaling its last breath. 4 silhouettes stood in the upstairs window, perfectly still, watching. I drove until the trees thinned and the fog lifted. Then I noticed something impossible. The rain had stopped. The road ahead was dry. The sky above was clear, but I was drenched. The next morning, I quit. I tried to show my manager the photos I'd taken, but every single image was pitch black. Except one. The last one. It showed the house perfectly, gleaming wet beneath a stormy sky. And on the window pane, written in dripping letters, were the words, "Thank you for letting us out. No one's found that property since." The coordinates lead to a patch of empty forest. No sign of a house or a clearing. But people who drive through that stretch on rainy nights say the same thing, that for a few seconds, their windshield fogs up and they hear the faint sound of rain, even when the sky above is clear. And if you listen closely, you can hear it, dripping, like the sound of a storm, still trapped inside a house that doesn't exist anymore. It's one thing to hear a knock at your door during a thunderstorm. It's another when the knocking doesn't stop, even after you open it. That night, someone came to my door and never really left. It was early November, the beginning of a long, brutal Oregon winter, the kind of season where the rain blurs the world into shades of gray, and the nights feel longer than they should. I was staying alone in a small cabin I'd been renting while working the night shift at a power station 20 miles out of town. The place was remote. My nearest neighbor was over 3 miles away, and the forest outside seemed to swallow every sound except the steady hiss of rain. That night, the electricity kept flickering, making the shadows crawl across the walls. Wind howled through the trees, rattling the shutters like skeletal fingers. I tried to distract myself with coffee and an old radio, but the signal was dead. Around midnight, I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the door. Knock, knock, knock. At first I thought it was a branch blown loose, or maybe an animal brushing against the porch. But then it came again, louder, more deliberate, almost impatient. I froze, mug halfway to my lips, heart pounding. No one should have been out there. The road was washed out from the rain. The power lines were down. There was no way anyone could have driven that far through the mud. I set the mug down and slowly walked to the door, the floorboards creaking under my bare feet. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. Just the wind. Just the storm. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound vibrated through the wood, deep and wet, like knuckles on a soaked coffin. I grabbed my flashlight and peeked through the small glass pane beside the door. The beam cut through the rain, but the porch was empty. Still, the sound didn't stop. It was right there, just on the other side, close enough that I could almost feel it, like someone was pressing their ear against the door, listening. Every instinct screamed at me not to open it, and yet I did. The moment I cracked the door, a blast of freezing wind slammed into me. The candle behind me nearly went out, and rain sprayed my face. No one was there, just wet footprints, bare, human, leading from the edge of the porch into the trees. They were small, delicate. A woman's, maybe. I followed them with my flashlight beam. They trailed off into the darkness, fading as the rain washed them away. My gut twisted. I slammed the door shut, bolted it, and stood there, listening to the sound of my own breathing. I didn't sleep that night. 2 nights later, it happened again. Same time, 12:14 a.m. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I turned off the lights and sat in silence. Then, a voice, faint, muffled, and trembling, filtered through the wood. "Can I come in? I'm cold." The tone wasn't threatening. It was pitiful. A woman's voice, cracking on the edge of tears. I hesitated. My logical mind told me to ignore it. Maybe it was a stranded traveler, maybe a prank. But the forest was endless, the storm relentless. Who could be out there? "Please," the voice whispered again. "Just for a moment. I'm so cold." My heart pounded. I leaned closer to the peephole. At first, nothing. Only the dripping of rain. Then, lightning flashed across the sky, and for a split second, I saw her. A woman in a soaked gray coat, her hair plastered to her face, eyes wide, too wide. And she wasn't standing. She was crawling toward the door. I stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp. The knocking resumed, faster this time, violent, frantic. I pressed my hands over my ears and shouted, "Go away!" Then just as suddenly, it stopped. When I dared to look again, the porch was empty. The next morning, I found a photograph wedged between the floorboards of the porch. A small, waterlogged photo, black and white, corners curled. It showed a woman standing in front of my cabin. Same door, same porch, but the picture was old. Decades at least. Her face was turned slightly away, and there was a dark stain spreading across her chest, right where her heart would have been. That was the moment I decided to leave. I packed my bag that afternoon, tossed everything in my truck, and turned the ignition. But the engine wouldn't start. Battery fine. Gas tank full. It just wouldn't turn over. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Something, someone, darting between the trees. I spun the flashlight toward the forest, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, the porch light flickered on by itself. That night, I locked every window, every door. Rain lashed the cabin until it sounded like screaming. At exactly midnight, I heard it again, but not knocking this time. Scratching. Long, slow, steady scratching. Fingernails dragging across wood. I shouted, "Who are you? What do you want?" Silence. Then, a whisper. Soft, wet. "You let me in once." My blood ran cold. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But then, that first night, when I opened the door, I aimed my flashlight at the floor, and there they were. Wet footprints, leading from the door, across the room, right to where I was standing. The storm outside raged. The walls groaned under the wind. I bolted into the bathroom, the only windowless room, and locked the door. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. The mirror above the sink was fogged over, but as I wiped it clean, I froze. Behind me, reflected in the glass, was the woman, standing in the doorway. Her soaked hair hung like seaweed. Her lips were cracked and blue. Eyes gleamed, hollow and endless, and she was smiling. "You left the door open," she whispered. I spun around, but the doorway was empty. Only the faint drip of water echoed through the side. By dawn, the storm had passed. I told myself it was exhaustion, isolation, my mind playing tricks. I called my supervisor, said I was heading back to town. But when I stepped outside, the forest didn't look right. The trees seemed closer. The air was thick, unmoving. The color had drained from everything. Then I saw the footprints, mine, leading from the porch into the woods, and another set beside them. Bare feet, small, following me, step for step. Thunder cracked, even though the sky was clear. Then, from inside the cabin, came the sound. Knock, knock, knock. Only this time, it came from inside. Weeks later, a ranger found the cabin abandoned. The door unlocked. No signs of a struggle. Just one thing lying on the porch. The same photograph. Only now, there were two people in it. The woman in the coat, and a man standing beside her. His face turned slightly away, but if you looked closely enough, you could see the faint reflection of the cabin window in his eyes. And in that reflection, rain was falling. Even now, when it storms, sometimes I hear it. 3 slow knocks, soft and patient. And sometimes, just before sleep, I see her reflection in the glass, dripping wet, smiling faintly as she whispers, "Can I come in? I'm cold." Have you ever stayed somewhere that seemed to breathe? Where the walls felt like they were listening, and every door you opened led you right back to the same room? I thought I was losing my mind, until the house proved me right. It started 3 years ago, when my best friend Leela found a 2-story colonial house for rent just outside a quiet town in Oregon. The rent was cheap, suspiciously cheap, but we were desperate. She had just escaped a bad relationship, and I had been living out of her car for weeks. The house sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by dripping pine trees and fog so thick it seemed alive. Its windows were long, narrow, and reflective of nothing, even under daylight. The real estate agent, an older woman with trembling hands, handed us the keys but refused to step inside. Her last words before she drove off still echo in my head. Make sure you don't stay past midnight on your first night. The house doesn't like new people. We laughed, of course. Who wouldn't? That night, rain tapped softly against the windows, and the air smelled of wet earth and cedar. We unpacked what little we owned, drank cheap wine on the living room floor, and listened to the wind whistle through the ancient chimney. For a while, it felt peaceful, safe even. Then came the first knock. It was around 1:14 a.m. when we heard it. Slow, hollow knocks, like someone tapping the inside of a wall. 3 times. Then silence. Probably the pipes, Lila murmured sleepily. But as soon as she said it, the knocking came again. This time from the hallway behind us. We turned, hearts pounding, but saw nothing. The air suddenly felt heavy, thick with moisture, as though the rain had seeped into the house itself. We laughed it off nervously and decided to get some sleep. Lila took the upstairs bedroom, and I stayed on the couch, too uneasy to climb those creaking stairs. But around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate pacing. I called Lila's name. No answer. Then from the stairs, a whisper. Soft, drawn out, and impossibly close. One word. Stay. The next morning, we both pretended everything was fine, though neither of us had truly slept. But that afternoon, as I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, something felt wrong. It should have taken 5 steps to reach the end, but after 15, I was still walking. The wallpaper seemed to change with each step, subtly at first, then completely. My reflection in the framed glass along the wall lagged behind me. Half a second too slow. When I finally reached what should have been the kitchen, I instead found myself standing back in the living room. I hadn't turned around. I had just appeared there. Lila stood by the window, pale as the fog outside. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she whispered. When I asked what she meant, she pointed to the vent above us. From within, faint voices whispered, overlapping, urgent, almost human. We pressed our ears closer. They sounded like people arguing, but the words we caught made my skin crawl. They're still here. Don't let them out yet. By the 3rd day, we decided to leave. We packed what little we had, locked every window, and headed for the front door, only to find it gone. The frame remained, but beyond it was nothing but smooth plaster. The back door, the windows, even the cellar. Every exit had been sealed overnight, replaced with solid walls. Panic set in. The rain never stopped. It hammered the roof relentlessly, as though trying to bury the sound of our fear. By evening, the lights flickered and died, leaving us in total darkness. Only the sound of the rain and our ragged breathing filled the house. I tried calling for help, but there was no signal. Then, the stairs creaked. Someone or something, was coming down, slow and deliberate. We pointed our flashlights toward the noise. The beam caught nothing but the empty staircase, until a hand appeared around the railing. It was grayish and bloated, as if it had been submerged in water too long. Another hand followed, then a head. It looked like Leela, her face, her wet hair. But her eyes were black and dripping, her mouth slightly open as water poured from it. Her double stared at us, and a puddle began to form beneath her. The real Leela screamed and bolted toward the upstairs bedroom. The figure followed, dragging itself up the stairs, its wet hair smearing dark streaks along the wall. I chased after her, but when I reached the top, the hallway had changed again. It stretched endlessly now, lined with mirrors on both sides. My reflection stared back. Dozens of me, each one slightly distorted. Some smiled, some moved before I did. The air buzzed with static, and the floorboards groaned beneath my feet. "Leela!" I shouted. My voice echoed infinitely. Then, one of the reflections turned its head, only that one, and whispered, "Go back downstairs. She's not yours anymore." I stumbled backward, slammed into a real wall, and ran. When I reached the bottom, Leela stood in the living room, facing the wall. Her hair was dripping. Her eyes were wide and glassy. "Leela," I whispered. She turned slowly, her voice flat and emotionless. "You shouldn't have come back." I grabbed my bag and ran toward the front door, and suddenly it was there again, wide open, rain pouring through it like a curtain of water. I didn't look back. I didn't check if Leela followed. I ran barefoot into the storm, into the woods, until I reached the main road. A passing truck nearly hit me. The driver called the police, who later went to investigate the house. But when they arrived, there was nothing. No furniture, no belongings, not even footprints inside. The property records showed the house had been abandoned for over 20 years. There was no record of a woman named Leela ever living there. When they described the interior, they mentioned something that still chills me to this day. There were no mirrors in the entire house. Only one massive water stain on the ceiling, shaped almost exactly like a person lying flat. It's been months since that night, but I still wake to the sound of rain. Some nights, I dream of her, Lila, or whatever she became, standing by a window, watching me through the downpour. Her lips move, forming the same silent word over and over. I can't quite hear it, but I think it's stay. Sometimes when the rain is heavy enough, I swear I can feel my walls breathing. Once I even saw a pale handprint appear on the inside of my window. I moved the next morning, but no matter where I go, the rain always finds me. And when I sleep, I still hear that same voice whispering through the walls, patient and cold, like a promise I can't escape. You left, it says, but the house didn't. You ever stare into a mirror too long and start to feel like the reflection isn't really you anymore? That night, I learned what it means when the mirror moves first. It began one rainy evening in late October, the kind of night where the streetlights flicker like dying fireflies, and everything feels just slightly off. I was house-sitting for my aunt, who owned an old two-story home on the outskirts of town. A narrow, creaking house surrounded by tall pine trees that swallowed the moonlight whole. She was away for the week, and my only job was to feed her cats, keep the lights on, and make sure no one broke in. It sounded simple, peaceful, even. I had work to finish, and the solitude seemed perfect. There was only one strange thing about the house: the hallway mirror. It was tall and antique, framed in dark oak, with a faint silver tarnish along the edges. It leaned slightly forward against the wall near the staircase, angled so that it caught everyone who passed from the living room to the kitchen. My aunt had warned me before she left. Never move the mirror. It's balanced perfectly. I laughed it off, assuming she just didn't want me to drop her expensive antique. The first night passed quietly. The rain fell steady against the windows. The cats purred beside me, and the only sounds were the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock and the occasional groan of the old house settling. Around midnight, while heading to bed, I passed the hallway mirror, and for just a second, I thought I saw someone standing behind me. A faint flicker of movement at the end of the hall. I turned, heart racing, but there was nothing. Just shadows. I told myself it was the lighting. Rain and exhaustion playing tricks on my eyes. By the second night, the storm had worsened. Wind howled down the chimney, and the walls shuddered like they were breathing. Around 1 a.m., I walked past the mirror again to grab a drink. And that's when I noticed something wrong. The reflection didn't match. In the mirror, the door behind me was open, slightly ajar. But when I turned around, the real door was shut tight. I looked back at the mirror, still open. My stomach tightened. I whispered, "I'm just tired. It's the lighting." But then I noticed my breath fogging up the mirror, even though the hallway wasn't cold. By the third night, the cats refused to go near it. They would hiss and arch their backs, giving the mirror a wide berth, as if something was waiting on the other side. That should have been enough for me to stop looking. But curiosity got the better of me. Around 2:47 a.m., I stood in front of it with my phone flashlight and whispered, "What are you?" My reflection lagged, just for a second. I blinked, but the reflection's lips were still moving after I'd stopped. Then came a faint sound, a soft, deliberate knock from inside the mirror. My phone slipped from my hand and rolled under the couch as I stumbled backward. The mirror rippled, like a thin layer of water disturbed by wind. Then it went still again. From that moment on, something about it changed. Whenever I passed by, I'd see my reflection smiling when I wasn't, or tilting its head slightly faster than me. Little delays that felt deliberate. The next evening, a new horror began. The smell. Damp wood, rust, and iron. Faintly metallic, like old blood. It clung to the hallway, stronger every time I passed. Then I noticed the handprints. Small, smudged, almost childlike, scattered across the glass. I wiped them away, but they came back an hour later, higher this time, as if whoever made them was standing up now. Both cats were asleep in the other room. That's when I realized the prints weren't on the outside of the glass. They were inside. The final night, the storm raged harder than ever. Thunder cracked, shaking the windows, and the lights flickered before dying completely. I lit a single candle. The shadows around me moved like they were alive. Then, from somewhere deep inside the glass, came the same slow, hollow knocking. Knock, knock. The mirror trembled slightly, as though something behind it was breathing against the surface. "Hello?" I whispered. My reflection smiled. Not a nervous smile, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far, showing too many teeth. The candle slipped from my hand, and the hallway went pitch black. I heard the rain, my heartbeat, and then something stepped out of the mirror. It moved wrong, jerky, like a puppet with invisible strings. I didn't see its face, but I felt it. Cold, damp, smelling of rot and soil as it brushed past me. I bolted into the guest room, slammed the door, and locked it. My chest heaved as footsteps creaked down the hallway. Slow, deliberate, fading into silence. When I woke to pale morning light, I ran. I didn't grab my bag or my shoes. I sprinted into the rain and didn't stop until I reached the main road, gasping, soaked, shaking. 2 weeks later, when my aunt returned, I begged her to sell the mirror. She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at me with this strange, weary expression and said, "You shouldn't have stayed upstairs after dark." Then she told me something that made my stomach twist. Years ago, that mirror wasn't a mirror at all. It used to be part of an old door, sealed with silvered glass, after a man died in the house. He was found standing in the hallway, staring into it, mouth open, like he'd been screaming for help that never came. They sealed the door to keep it from coming through again. As she said this, I noticed something, just for a second, a flicker in her eyes. Her reflection in the window behind her moved half a beat too slow. That's when I knew. Whatever stepped out of that mirror that night didn't stay in that house. It followed me. Now every time I pass a mirror, in my home, in a store, in my car, I sometimes catch it. A glimpse of myself, still smiling back. And when it rains, I swear I can hear faint knocking again. If your reflection ever moves first, don't look away. Because that's when it learns what you look like from the outside.